loss prevention from our perspective, and we have been in the industry for about 6 years. We have to take a holistic view of loss management from the end-to-end chain of vendor to customer. I mean, that's the way we look at it. It's, probably what I'll do, Soman, is share some of our experiences in terms of how we look at loss management across the spectrum and what we have learned over the last journey that we practically learn every day. In a large sense, you can't manage anything unless you can measure it. Someone said the fundamental crux of what we did practically from the beginning is put in place a reasonably tight and robust architecture in terms of how do we significantly invest in technology and resources so that we are able to measure where the actual loss occurs. And then it's a host of stuff that we then do in terms of overlay, in terms of analytics and people training that goes behind the entire loss management process. If I start from the front of house, I mean, typically the traditional measures of security cameras, how do you ensure that sweethearting doesn't happen at the front of the house? All of that we do, but over a period of time, it's also become in terms of how do we ensure that the cashiers learn, how do we put in an infrastructure in terms of loss prevention at the store, wherein there is a feeling of ownership from the employee standpoint, that it's actually his own store, and actually by stealing, he's stealing from himself, and that goes a long way in terms of how you manage employee fraud at the front of the house. It's going on to issues like store design. How do you lay out the store? Store layouts have a significant impact in the way loss happens in the front of house. Inventory also has a significant impact. I mean, typically most companies tend to measure loss as percentage of sale. We typically also look at loss of contribution to inventory, because just because you pump in more stock to the store, the probability that the loss increases is far higher. And loss from an inventory standpoint is not only shrink, especially from a business, and I know Toshni understands this far better, is in terms of especially the food business, is that loss happens actually a lot more when it comes to the way we handle food products in terms of damaged products, expired products. I mean, people typically focus on shrink. Loss happens equally significantly in food and grocery out of dump. Very different when it comes to apparel and footwear and items like that. How do you therefore analyze replenishment to the store? How do you do better planogramming? How do you do better stock control in terms of physical inventory processes, in terms of rigorous counting, whether it's daily stock correction, whether it's external independent physical inventory processes? And in our case, we of course do it internally, but it's completely independent of the store operations team, done by an independent team managed by one of my colleagues. And it just helps us understand hot stores, helps us understand the kind of SKUs where loss tends to happen more, and therefore helps us work better in terms of the entire supply chain process, both in terms of displays, the way we do inner cases, the way we do replenishment of the store, and helps us to get into that level of detail to manage loss at an SKU level better. Then when you go to the store, typical loss happens at, like I said, across various parts of the stop. When you move products from the DC to the store, or when you do store-to-store transfer, unless in a retail kind of environment, documentation is closed every day. Typically what used to happen, even in our case, when we started business 6 years back, probably documentation control was typically end of the month, that all documents in the balance sheet are closed end of the month. Now we have practically come to a rigor of saying this document closed practically within 24 hours. Because otherwise what happens is by the time you find out shrink has happened, the original reason why shrink happened is completely lost. Because it may be lost in the fact that documentation did not happen on time. So shrink happened in store A while it's actually getting reported in store B. Then you can't control it at the origin of where the loss is. So it's exceedingly important in terms of where stock moves from location A to location B. How do you tightly manage the way of stock movement and do the appropriate postings in its own form? A significant part of loss also interestingly happens at the in-gate of the DC. I mean, if I take a quick and dirty look at percentage of loss, you'd be surprised to note that 10% of the loss actually happens